This video is going to be looking at the sources that discuss the First Peloponnesian War, looking at two main authors, Thucydides and Diodorus. So this part of Thucydides is going to pick up where the previous video left off. So you might remember the Spartans had been asked to come and give aid around Thassos, but were unable to because there was an earthquake and then there was a revolt of their helots. So this is where Thucydides is picking up from. So the Spartans finding the war in Ithome showed no signs of ending. So that's the helot revolt. Appealed to help from their allies, including Athens. So remember, although we have got a split in, well, the Hellenic League is now split in half, sorry. You've got the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League. Athens and Sparta are still technically allied. So they asked for Athens to come with other people, and the Athenians came to Sparta with a considerable force under the command of Cimon. However, I'll come to the however. So they asked for the Athenians because they were really good at siege operations, as shown by the 3-year siege, for example, of Thassos. And Spartans can't do it. So one of the themes we look at is about solving conflicts, and one of them is about besieging. So there's a really nice quote there about Athenians being very successful at using sieges to win wars. However, here's my however. The Spartans are worried about the Athenians being there, which is what this talks about here, and the unorthodoxy of the Athenians. What they're worried about here is the Athenians' democratic nature. So now we have started to get some evidence of one of those causes of conflict. So originally, on the cause of conflict, there were, I think, 6 themes. And I said, ignore this one that says political ideologies. What we now have is the first piece of evidence about this problem with political ideologies. So political ideologies only ever means the conflict between oligarchies and democracies. So the fact that Sparta is worried about the democratic nature of the Athenians leads them to send the Athenians away and keep the rest of the allies there to deal with the helots. Now, understandably, the Athenians are offended and they don't think they deserve this treatment from Sparta. So when they returned, they denounced the original Treaty of Alliance and allied themselves with Sparta's enemy. So now Athens and Sparta are not allies. And it's all to do with the fact that, according to Thucydides, because Sparta is worried about the democratic nature of Athens and that maybe a democracy would spread in the Peloponnesian area if Athens stayed there. So we have here the political ideologies causing conflicts because the alliance then splits, and then we have the build-up into the First Peloponnesian War. So the rebels in Ithome have been fighting for a really long time, unable to hold any longer, come to terms with Sparta, so that is dealt with, which is sort of what this is talking about. Some people leave the Spartan area. At the same time, we have Megara also joins the Delian League. And they abandoned their alliance with Sparta because the Corinthians were attacking in the war concerning the frontier boundaries. So Corinth is always a bit of a pain. Sparta's not doing anything to help Megara, so Megara chooses to leave, and they go and join the Athenian alliance instead. And the Athenians built for the Megarans their long walls down to the city of Nicaea. And as a result of the Athenians helping Megara, the Corinthians begin to conceive a bitter hatred for Athens. It's got long roots, that hatred of Athens. Just think back to the Persian War when the Corinthian commander was sort of saying, Athens shouldn't be able to say anything about Salamis because they haven't got a city to go back to because it's been burnt down. So the Corinthians have never particularly liked Athens, let's be honest. But this is the moment where they sort of maybe have a bit more of a reason specifically to hate them. While this is all kind of going on, we also have still some issues with Persia. So there's a revolt of Egypt from the Persian king. It's a new king, Artaxerxes. And so the guy this guy here, Inaros, I think, leads the revolt, and he asks for the Athenians to come and help him. So the Athenians have to engage in a campaign against Cyprus with 200 men on 200 ships of their own and their allies. So they decide to abandon this campaign and come to Egypt, and they go and attack Egypt. At this time too, the Athenians also send out a fleet and make a landing at Hellene, where they engaged by a force of Corinthians and Epidaurians, and the Corinthians are victorious. So Athens is fighting on 2 fronts at this particular point. At the same time, another war breaks out between Athens and Aegina. Remember, these two have never liked each other. and there's a big sea battle off Aegina between the Athenians and the Aegiatians with the support of allies on both sides. So the battle's won by Athens. They land on Aegina and they besiege the place. And at this point, the Peloponnesians, so the Spartan and their allies, want to help Aegina, made a landing on the island with 300 hoplites. Sorry, that's a typo from my part. And while this is going on, the Corinthians and their allies siege the heights of Grananaea because they're taking an opportunity, because obviously Athens is split. They're having to sort of help with Megara. They're fighting in Egypt. They're also fighting the Corinthians here, and there's a war against Athens, and Aegina, merging the words together. So the Athenians are split, so Corinth starts to take this opportunity. So the Athenians obviously want to beat the Corinthians because they don't like each other. So they raise in the city force of the old men and the very young who've been left behind and march to Megara. And then there's an indecisive battle between themselves and the Corinthians. The Corinthians withdrew and how do we join these? So yeah, sorry, I was rereading that source because it's like a really weird story. So anyway, the Corinthians had withdrawn from this particular battle. The Athenians set themselves up a trophy to say that we'd won. 12 days later, the Corinthians sort of hear about this, march out, put up their own trophy to prove that the victory had been theirs. I mean, the victory was neither of them. It was completely indecisive. The Athenians then come out against them from Megara, overwhelm the contingent that was setting up the trophy, and then engage and defeat the rest of the enemy. The Corinthians are defeating, and essentially this bit is they fall into a big ditch, which is really stupid. And the Athenians close up the entrance and stone to death all the people that are trapped in this ditch. I shouldn't laugh, it's not funny, but it is quite funny. This bit that's put in black, it says 106 in your source books. It's just a repeat of this. I think I must have accidentally merged the two paragraphs together so we can ignore it. So while they're defeating the Corinthians and while they're fighting in Aegina and doing everything else that they're doing, they are also building their two long walls down to the sea. The Athenians are a busy, busy bunch. So these are known as, funny enough, the long walls. So remember my imaginary map? We had Athens over here somewhere. Athens. We had Piraeus over here, the port. So they've got fortifications around Athens, they've got fortifications around the port, and what the long walls do is they join up the two. So it kind of goes like that, long wall around the city, long wall back up. So the whole thing is encircled with fortifications to protect, well, obviously Athens and then any imports or exports in their trade. It's quite sensible, means that if they do get besieged, they can last for ages because they've got the port, so they're fine. So they build these walls, and while that's happening, we've got the Phoenicians start a campaign against Doris, which is where the Spartans come from. The Spartans come to the assistance of the Dorians with a force of 1,500 hoplites of their own and 10,000 of their allies. And the Spartans compel the Phoenicians to come to terms when they obviously beat them. And they partly do that because they're worried. They were informed that there was a group of people in Athens who were secretly negotiating with them in the hope of putting an end to democratic government. So again, we've got this kind of oligarchy versus democracy kind of issue going on in terms of a cause of conflict. So the Athenians march out against them with their whole army, supported by 1,000 troops from Argos and a contingent from their own allies. It's really irritating, I keep doing that. So they've got lots of men, and we end up with this battle, which is the Battle of Tanagra. Sorry, I hate some of these Greek words, they're really hard saying. This is in Boeotia. So this is probably one of the biggest battles in the First Peloponnesian War. So you've kind of got the issues around Egypt, you've obviously got the Phoenicians, you've got other places being attacked, and then we have this particular battle. So at this particular battle, the Spartans and their allies are victorious. And then the Spartans march down into the Megariad, and they're kind of aiming to get down to like the area around Megara. So the Athenians, I will highlight that because this gets a bit confusing, all the people doing lots of different things. So the Athenians march into Boeotia, and they defeat the Boeotians at this particular battle, and they conquer the rest of Boeotia and Phoikos. They pull down the fortifications of Tanagra, and they take hostages the richest people, and they then finish building their long walls. So Athens is again doing lots of things in lots of different places. Shortly afterwards, Aegina surrenders, so they Athens also wins against them and is forced to destroy her fortifications, to hand over a fleet, and to agree to pay tribute in the future. So we're talking about the treatment of allies in terms of desire for wealth and resources. We have a couple of examples here. So the fact they had to hand over their fleet shows that Athens was just trying to defeat them to get hold of the boats. And obviously they have to pay tribute in the future, and of course being the Delian League shows they're getting money from it as well. What they then do is they sail round the Peloponnese, burnt the Spartan dockyards, and captured the Corinthian city of Chalcis. So the burning of the Spartan dockyards would obviously have an economic effect on the Spartans, which would also make things very difficult for them going into the future. And then we come back to Egypt. So the problem with the Peloponnesian War, and you'll realise this when we do the second Peloponnesian War, is the war itself is spread over this huge area. And there's lots of little things happening all at roughly the same time. So we've had this issue with Corinth, we've had an issue with Sparta, we had an issue with Aegina, and we've got an issue in Boeotia, and it's all happening around the same time. So while that is all going on, we still have Athens involved in conflict in Egypt, which is what this part of the source is talking about. So the Athenian and Allied forces are still engaged. So initially the Athenians are masters of Egypt, and the king of Persia sent to Sparta a Persian called Megabazus, fantastic name, with money to bribe the Spartans to invade Attica. However, these negotiations are unsuccessful. So we do start to see a change in relationship between the Persians and some Greek states. So you have an early example of the Persians trying to ally with Sparta, which, considering you've just had the Persian War, is quite ironic. But anyway, that is an example of other states becoming involved again. So these negotiations are unsuccessful. So then the king sends out to Egypt another Persian, really helpfully called Megabazus. He's a different one. So there's two of them with the same name, but this one's the son of this guy. You don't know who he's the son of, but at least we have a sort of a vague idea that it's someone different. Anyway, he sends out this Megabazus, and Megabazus too is sent out with a large army, and he defeats the Egyptians and their allies in battle and drove the Greeks out of Memphis. So basically the Athenians initially were doing really well, and then they're kind of forced to retreat because they can't win. So the great adventure of the Greeks comes to nothing. Egypt again goes back into the hands of the king of Persia. Fine. So it was pretty pointless, to be completely honest. What we do have, though, is an example of Athenian imperialism. So imperialism is empire growth. Obviously, we talked about it in terms of the Persian Empire. Egypt, it wasn't necessary to go to there. You know, it is in, well, Asia, obviously. Well, not Asia, we know what I mean. It's not Greek land, so there's no reason for Athens to go there to attack that land. So this is definitely an example of Athens appearing to try and expand their empire, to conquer more lands well beyond the remit of the Delian League. Further evidence of this Athenian imperialism is the movement of the treasury. So remember, the Delian League treasury had been on Delos in order to sort of collect all of the allies' tribute together. So in order to keep tight hold of their naval hegemony, so hegemony just means dominance, transferred to Athens the monies collected on Delos for common use, so about 8,000 talents, and handed over to another guy called Pericles to look after. So Pericles is a strategoi, and he's going to become a very important strategoi to us. He will pop up when we do section B a lot, because he's a really important politician. And it talks about here, he's really skillful in speaking, so he has good rhetoric skills. But either way, the money is entrusted to him because he's seen as head of the Athenians, and what we have is imperialism here. Athens has now got complete control over the treasury in terms of the Delian League. It is no longer the Delian League, it is now the Athenian Empire. So around this sort of time, there are obviously lots of different other battles going on. So we have this guy here is exiled from Thessaly, I can't say that, and he asks the Athenians to come and restore him. So if we want an example then of an ally, again, pushing for conflict, we might as well highlight it. We have an example here. So the Athenians took with them a force of Boeotians and Phocians. Remember, these are guys they've all conquered, who are now their allies. Yeah, that's one way of phrasing it. And marched to Phalalassus. I think I just made up that word. Pharalus, sorry, in Thessaly, and they dominated the country, but they failed to capture the town or secure any of the objects of the expedition, and then they go home. Okay. Shortly afterwards, a force of 1,000 Athenians embarked at Pagae, which is now under Athenian control. This is under the command of Pericles, told you to pop up again, and they made a landing at Skion and defeated in battle the troops who opposed them, and then they take over that particular land, and then they go home. But they failed to capture this particular town, which is not particularly important. So they take over these bits, and then they leave. And then they decide, 3 years later, a 5 years truce was made between Athens and the Spartans. So the Athenians, under the command of Cimon, made an expedition against Cyprus with 200 of their own ships and of their own allies. So they make this truce, and then they go and sail to Cyprus to deal with their thing. So Cimon and Pericles are rivals. They don't particularly like each other. They're always kind of undermining each other. And in Cyprus, Cimon dies suddenly. Bit more detail on what happens in Cyprus is here. So the Athenians had increased their dominance to such an extent that they defeated the Great Persians in contests both land and sea. We know that because the Persians had been pushed out of Greek lands. And then Artaxerxes, the Persian king, learns about defeats around Cyprus because the bits in Cyprus hadn't gone very well, and decides in his interest to make peace with the Greeks. So he sort of goes, right, I've had enough of this. The Athenians and other allies that keep attacking me, I could just do without it. So he decides that he needs to create a settlement. So he sends Artabazos and Megabyzos to Athens to discuss a settlement. An agreement was made between the Athenians and their allies and the Persians about peace, and that the main clause is that the Greek cities in Asia to be autonomous, so they will not have to be under Persian rule anymore. Well, they're under kind of Persian control, but they're allowed to rule themselves. And as a result, the Athenians withdraw their troops from Cyprus, having achieved a brilliant victory and a most famous peace, as in a victory over the Persians, technically, because it's now a peace treaty. And it happens that Cimon died from illness while in Cyprus. So Cimon, he's been in loads of stuff, is now just dead. And that's the end of Cimon. This will happen a lot when we do some of these sources, that people just sort of die, who've been studying for a while. So Cimon has popped up, done his job, and then promptly props his clogs. And that is essentially it for the part of the source book talking about the First Peloponnesian War.